Hands up if you're really kind of working with your materials now, sending things out. Okay, I see one. Thanks, seeing Jen. Okay, all right. And everyone else in the room, are you thinking about your job search, preparing for your job search, but you haven't really yet started building your materials? Hands up if it describes you. Okay. All right, great. Okay, looks like a lot more of us are in that stage. Great. Okay, so that's perfect because that's where we're going to be aiming at today, kind of talking about how do you start thinking about the search timeline, how do you start preparing yourself, and start thinking about what you need to put in place to be in a really good position once you have a job out in front of you that you want to apply for. So just a little, so I am, as you can see from my job description, I'm a staff person in the graduate school, so I'm not currently in a faculty position. But when I finished my degree, I did what's known as a parallel search. So I applied for faculty positions, and I also applied for like higher education administrative positions because I had skills and experience in that area. And I'm very happy with where I landed, and you know, that was what fit where I wanted to be, both professionally and, you know, for my life goals. But we'll talk a little bit about that too, about how to approach a faculty job search, considering all of the options that you have in front of you and really making the right decisions for you as you start to think about your next steps. So just a thumbs up if you can see my slides. I want to make sure everybody can see before I press ahead. Perfect. All right, let's get started. So as I said, we're at this stage here in April. Maybe some of you are finishing your graduate programs this spring. Maybe you're just thinking about what your next steps are. Maybe you're in a postdoc position and you're thinking about your next steps, and you're thinking about how to get yourself together over the summer so that in the fall you can make a really strong move. So let's think about, before we start really approaching the market, what are the things that we need to know or to have in place or reflect on before we start really actively working on this search. So number one, first and foremost, I'm probably preaching to the choir here. I think everybody here knows this, but in case, you know, we just need to underscore that the faculty job market is tough. It is so tough, right? The number of people graduating with a PhD grows, but the number of faculty positions stay flat. So it is really competitive. And that's not, I don't say that to discourage you, but I say that to allow you to give yourself some grace, that it's going to be challenging. You're going to send out some applications and not hear back. And that doesn't mean that anything is wrong with you, and that doesn't mean you're not a strong candidate. It doesn't mean that you're not an excellent researcher, right? It just means that it's a tough market. So we all need to support each other through this. If you have friends and colleagues who are going through a search at the same time, be kind to each other, support each other, have solidarity with each other, because it really is tough, and it's important to acknowledge that. You know, and also, like, you know, if you are seeing people, you know, somebody else in your cohort or somebody else that you're working with, like they get a job and, you know, it doesn't work out for you, know that success in the faculty job market, it's really, you know, it's not just about who's the best candidate. It's about finding the right fit with the institution. It's about just the luck of who they're looking for in that particular search, right? It's not, don't allow those things to discourage you. Have some, you know, resilience as you face a really challenging market. And also have a plan B, right? Know that this is tough, that you might not find your fit, certainly the first time out on the market. It might take you maybe a couple of rounds. So think about whether you have that time to spend a couple of years on the market, and whether you want to pursue a plan B, some other career path that you want to explore, some other way that you can do your research, that you can share your skills, that you can feel fulfilled in your work, that isn't necessarily the faculty job that you had in mind as the next step for you. That's not to say give up on your plans, but just don't neglect that plan B. Keep that open as an option for yourself. Continue to nurture that just in case you find that it really is the best fit for you. And speaking of fit, you really want to think, I certainly thought that going into a faculty position was the logical next step for me, and it ended up not being that, right? And at the end of the day, I really had to kind of assess whether it was the right fit for me. And I think there might be many of us in that boat where we think that, we want to go on the faculty market because it seems like the next thing to do, maybe our advisor is telling us that that's the next thing to do because that's what they know. But really think about an academic career. Is it really where your long-term goals, your lifestyle, and your values fit? And the answer to that may be yes. That is great. But it's something you want to know, right? We are all now in a research environment, so we get to see what it's like to have an academic career. But it's helpful to, talk to your faculty, really get to know what their day-to-day life is every day. Learn about some of the issues that they deal with all the time in their work. It might seem on the surface that they get to wake up and do their research, right? And teach and have balance in their life, and that's all great. But there's a lot of other things that we maybe see, maybe don't, right? Maybe it's worries about grant funding, right? Or competition or constant pressure of administrative demands. Like there are all these other aspects to a faculty career that might not be apparent on the surface. So do some informational interviews with faculty, get to know what that life is really like, and then decide if it's right for you before you put so much energy into pursuing a faculty position, right? So I include this little comic because it's pretty funny. The pro of being an academic researcher is that you can work whenever you want, right? There's a little bit more flexibility than say, a 9-to-5 corporate job. But the drawback to that is that there's more flexibility. There's fewer kind of concrete boundaries. And so you can end up working all the time if you don't have, really careful habits around that. So think about really whether that is where you want to be. And then along with that, in addition to kind of, lifestyle, balance, flexibility, all of those things, what do you really want to be doing, in your day-to-day, right? Are you really driven by the research? Is that what you really are drawn to? Do you want to be teaching, right? Are you interested in teaching colleges where your primary responsibility is the education of undergraduate students, right? Is mission important to you? Do you want to be at an institution where the school's mission really aligns with your values? And then other things that are really important are, what are your family needs? What are your, what kind of balance do you want around that? What is cost of living in some of the institutions that you're looking at? And is that reasonable for you based on the salaries that you see for those positions? So we'll talk a little bit more about salary later. But really think about what your needs are as a candidate on the market. And as you're starting to apply, as you start to see job ads come out, don't just look at the position itself, but look at the total package, right? Look at what the institution is offering you, what the geographic area is offering, right? How those things fit your goals. Okay. And then as you're starting to think about institutions where you might want to land at a faculty search, know that not all institutions are the same. So there are doctoral research universities like here at Stony Brook, but then there are also smaller universities that have predominantly master's levels degrees, primarily undergraduate institutions, associate's degree or community college institutions, which are mostly focused on, again, teaching at the undergraduate level, right? And your life as a faculty member is going to be drastically different at depending on which of these institutions you're hired by, right? So like I said, the example there is if you're at a community or a technical college, right, your primary responsibility is going to be teaching and probably a lot of service. Whereas at a research university, you might be able to do more research there or have more time dedicated to your research. you can look as you're starting to see the names of different institutions pop up in job ads. You can check their Carnegie classifications. And I recommend that you do that you do as much research about the institution as possible before you start to think about putting your application package together. Both because you want to show that you have done your homework on the institution and you understand how you would be a fit as a candidate, but also because you want to know if it's really someplace that you want to apply. And then once you've kind of considered all of these things, I put a link to, we'll share these slides after the workshop today, but I put a link here to an assessment that for your academic career readiness. So are you feeling like you are ready to go out on the job market? Are you at a point where, yes, this feels like the right fit for me? Yes, I feel like I'm ready for this journey, because it is a journey. And it's going to be a long process and take a lot of grit. So you want to make sure that you yourself are aligned in what you want to do. Okay. And so I mentioned before, kind of having a group, maybe you have some friends who are going out on the market together, people in your classes, maybe support from your faculty members who are interested in, supporting you through your search and writing reference letters for you. But it's really, really important that you gather that support network, because, otherwise you're kind of sending off those applications on your own, and that can feel like kind of a lonely process, especially, if you're not immediately hearing back from places. So creating a peer group, or even better, joining a PhD career ladder program. That's a program that we offer through the graduate school, where you get peer mentoring to move through 7 steps of a career development process. And it's great because you have that, not only that peer support, but kind of a structured path to, first of all, articulate your own goals, and then to do some career exploration about different paths that might be open to you and to pursue them. So if you're interested more about that, I would love to talk to you after the workshop today. But that's a great resource for you. Also talk to mentors, not only faculty members here at Stony Brook, but other people who are just interested in your success. Get their input, get their advice, and most importantly, get their support. You can join virtual communities like Future PI Slack, which is just like, instead of having a live peer cohort at Stony Brook, you can get some virtual support from colleagues who are also embarking on a job market search themselves. And as I've said a few times now, like, just recognize that, you're going to send out a lot of applications. You're not going to hear back from maybe most of them, right? But don't let that discourage you. It's okay to be disappointed, but you want to have resilience. Once you're sure that this is the path you want to take, move forward with that kind of resolution and resilience. But make sure you are getting some support, because otherwise that discouragement can come to the fore. Okay, so this is a little bit more about the PhD career ladder. If you do want some more information about that, you can scan the QR code. But like I said, I will send out these slides to you afterwards. So, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the PCLP. Okay, so that's just a little bit about like prepping for the process. So now we're going to talk about your application materials themselves and what are the things that you need to do to start your faculty search. And just a caveat, like, I'm going to give kind of a quick overview of typical applications in a faculty job, typical materials in a faculty job application, but we are going to have, this is the first of a series of workshops where we're going to really dive deep into these materials. So if you are working on your materials packet and you really want to make sure that they are high quality, that you've really put a lot of effort and thought into what you're sending out, make sure that you register for the upcoming workshops in these series, because I'm going to do like a quick snapshot of each. But there's a lot more that goes into each one that we'll want to make sure we cover in future workshops with you. Okay, so usual things that you'll find in a job ad that they ask you to send in. And this will vary a little bit by discipline. Some of it varies by region of the country too. But some things that you probably want to tee up now so that you have them ready to go when you see a job ad that you want to jump on, are a CV, right? And you'll want to have probably a few different versions of your CV if you're applying to different kinds of institutions, right? So for example, your CV that you send to a research institution is going to look different than a CV that you send to a teaching focused institution, because you want to prioritize different aspects of your academic career. They'll both be on there, right? You want all your research and you want all your teaching on that document. But you want to, for a teaching institution, you want to really front load your teaching experience. Whereas at a research institution, you want to show your publications, your grants. You want to really make that up kind of above the fold on that document. And same for a cover letter. You want to have a few different versions of that document that can be a template for you, depending on the institution, that are really, you want to figure out what are the key parts of how I describe myself as a scholar, how I describe myself as a teacher, how I describe my research, that are consistent across institutions. And then also think about where are the places you can tailor that based on what the priorities of that institution are, and what they're looking for in a faculty colleague. So CV and cover letter, pretty much every job ad is going to ask you for both of those. Many may also ask for a research statement where you give some more information about your future research plans, a teaching statement where you talk about your pedagogy or approaches in the classroom. Most will ask for probably 3 letters of recommendation. I've seen some ask for more, like 4 or 5. Occasionally they'll ask for like 2, but usually 3 is the number that you want to aim for. Diversity statement. Many institutions ask for this. Some, again, depending on where they are geographically, may not. We'll have a wonderful workshop later on this year led by Carrie and Wright on the diversity statement, so stay tuned for that. Some places may ask for a writing sample as well. So now is a really good time to think about what you have out there that's published that you could share in a application packet. And then some also, especially some teaching focused institutions, will ask for teaching evaluations. So that's also something you want to be thinking about now, is how are you going to keep track of your teaching evaluations and have those kind of in a folder ready to go for yourself. So most importantly, you do want to tailor your materials to each job ad, but you also want to make sure that your materials are telling a coherent narrative about yourself. So now is the time to think about what that narrative is. How do you describe yourself as a scholar, as an academic researcher? How do you present yourself in, we have, in the graduate school, we have a competition every spring called a 3-minute thesis, where dissertating students talk about their research in 3 minutes or less, right? They have to really distill the key points of what it is that you do. So I challenge you all here to start thinking about, how do you talk about yourself, not only your research, but yourself as a scholar in 3 minutes or less? What is it that you set out to do? What are your accomplishments? What are your goals? How do you really tell a coherent narrative around that, and communicate that in your job materials? That's going to be your goal, your ultimate goal. And then, so as you're building these written materials, try not to let perfectionism get in your way, right? You want your CV and cover letter and everything else you send to get you an interview, right? So that's the goal of the written materials. Once you get the interview, then you can start thinking about the next steps, but try to kind of break this down for yourself one step at a time. And think first about what's that written narrative, what's that written version of the 3 minutes that you can put together, that really communicates who you are and stands out in print. And then don't worry. I see a lot of people worrying about, what do I do for the interview? What do I do for the job talk right at the beginning of their search? And kind of don't take that on for yourself yet. That's a great problem to have later on in the process. But right now, just focus on putting together some really great, strong materials that you can send out that hopefully will get you in the door so that people can meet you and see what a wonderful colleague you would be. Do definitely tailor materials to the job ad. That's very important. Anybody who is kind of sending out generic, once you have your templates for materials, if you're just sending out generic materials that don't speak to the mission of the institution, the goals of the institution that you're applying to, or the curriculum that you're meant to be teaching into, people will kind of see that right away and weed that out right away. So make sure that you're really taking the time, even though it is very time consuming, to sit with the job ad, understand what they're really asking for, what they're really looking for in a colleague, and figure out how your narrative, your goals match that, and how you can tell them the story about why you would be a great fit for them. Only send what they request. Don't, it can be tempting to send, like if you have great teaching evaluations and you want them to know that you have amazing teaching evaluations, but they don't ask for it, don't be tempted to send that out, because a lot of places kind of frown on that as well. And then also at this stage in the process, create an Interfolio account. It's a great investment for this process because it helps you gather all of these materials together and send them out easily, especially for letters of reference, which you want to be collecting now. If you're thinking about a fall search, and you're talking to faculty, you're asking them to write you letters for the job market, you can request those directly through Interfolio and have them on file, and then just release them through the Interfolio account when they're requested by an institution. They're normally not requested right away in the process. That's usually in later rounds where they may ask you for reference contacts earlier on, but it's usually once you've had an interview that they'll ask you for your references. But nevertheless, if they do ask it for that early on in the process, you can just kind of trigger them to be sent through Interfolio, and you don't have to worry about it beyond that. Interfolio is not free, but I maintain my account. It's about $45 a year, something $48 a year, something like that. And it's a really worthwhile investment, especially if you end up going through a couple of rounds on the market, just to have all of those things together and be able to update those reference letters easily. It's just a really great tool. And then also many institutions now are using it to run their job searches. So they'll have job ads on Interfolio and you can just apply directly through there. It makes it really, really easy. Okay. So I already talked a little bit about your CV, but the CV is basically a full record of your academic career history, just everything you've done for all of your research accomplishments, your publications, all classes you've taught, any awards that you've received, any service that you've done, any institutional service that you've done, academic associations that you belong to, all of that stuff that you want them to know about it, that's going to be on your CV. Usually recent oldest, but where you have a little bit more agency in how you present this information is in the subcategories. So like I said before, you can privilege different types of information depending on the institution and what they are looking for. So you might want to bump your teaching up, or you might want to bump your research and publications up, again, depending on the type of institution. If you're applying internationally, other countries have different expectations around the CV. Like it's different from the US to UK, for example. So if that is you and you're planning an international search, just do a little bit of homework to understand what the expectations are for CVs in that country so that you can adjust accordingly. And then also, this is a piece of advice for all of these materials and throughout your search, is get feedback from your mentors, from your peers. Get a lot of feedback on your materials before you send things out, because those people, basically everybody you talk to within Stony Brook, if they're in a faculty position, if they're in a staff position, even your peers who are also sending materials out on the market, they'll have seen enough, right? They'll have been on a hiring committee for a faculty member. So they'll have seen a lot of these materials and they'll be able to give you some pointers about how you can really present yourself well. So throughout this whole process, just get that support and get that feedback as much as you can. For the cover letter, like I said, Similar to your CV, you also want to tailor your cover letter to the type of institution that you're applying for. And you really, really, really want to speak directly to the job ad to which you're applying. You want to understand what it is they're asking for and tell that story about, this is who I am, this is who you're looking for, and this is how we fit together. Don't go through everything in your CV and just kind of tell them everything about you, because they already have your CV. They can look that up. This is where you really want to tell that story and have a clear narrative, and maybe highlight what are the things that you feel are really important to your fit for that position. And like I said, draw clear conclusions about this is how, peanut butter and jelly fit together, right? That's the story that you want to tell. There's a basic structure to a cover letter. So it's usually about 3 paragraphs and or more. And you want to kind of have a paragraph dedicated to your research, one dedicated to your teaching and other service things. And you'll move those around depending on the priorities of the institution. We'll go in more detail about CVs and cover letters in an upcoming workshop, so I'll leave it there. But those are just kind of the basic things to know about that. In your research statement, if you're asked for one, you want to think about what is your research program, and think about it as if you are already a faculty member, right? If they hire you, what is the research that you are going to produce? What are the questions that you are looking to answer? And how are you going to contribute to your field? What is your vision for your research? So you can talk about successful projects that you've already had, what you see as the future direction of your research, and importantly, especially for research institutions, talk about opportunities that you have for external funding. If you've already secured funding for your work, you want to talk about that for sure, but they also want to know that you're able to sustain your research and develop independence as a researcher. So make sure that you address that. And again, we'll have an upcoming workshop dedicated specifically to the research statement, led by Jennifer Albanese, who's the director of the Writing Center and has a lot of expertise in this area. So I'm just kind of scratching the surface of this now, but if you're really interested in writing a strong research statement, we'll have more for you on that soon. And similarly for teaching statements, Dr. Kim Bell from the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching will be doing a fabulous workshop for us on the teaching statement. But generally, you want to show them, especially for institutions that are focused on teaching or where teaching undergraduates will be a large part of your workload. You want to show that you have reflected on who you are in the classroom with your students and how you can increase access to education, improve the learning experience, and increase outcomes in your course. So even if you don't have a lot of teaching experience, maybe as a grad student or maybe as a postdoc, you want to show that you're engaging with the literature around pedagogy and learning assessment, right? And if you feel like you need some help with that, or you need somebody to recommend some places to start reading and thinking about this, Dr. Bell is a really great resource for that. You also want to think about even if you have not had a lot of classroom experience, what would you do in the classroom? How would you translate your research into teaching? How would you bring undergraduates along with you in your research? It's something that you want to reflect on in your teaching statement. If you have experience in the classroom and you have great teaching evaluations or evidence of your teaching effectiveness, do include that here. And also make sure that you're talking about access, inclusion, that you're really thinking about how the institution values teaching and that you're similarly responding in kind in your teaching statement. And then this is a really important one. And when I have been kind of advising people one-on-one on their materials, I see people miss this a lot. But look at the school's curriculum that you're applying for. Sometimes they'll even mention in the job ad courses that they might want you to teach or might want you to develop. And you want to speak directly to that. If they're looking, for example, my background's in the humanities. So if I'm applying to a school where they want somebody to teach English 101 and 102, in my teaching statement, I'm going to talk exactly about either how I have taught similar courses in the past, or how I would take their curriculum from their course catalog and build out a syllabus around that and use different assignment approaches, assessment approaches to teaching that course. So be really specific, figure out what they are asking for, how they want you to fit into their teaching portfolio, and then be really specific about that in your teaching statement. Again, they may ask for teaching evaluations. So you might just gather a summary of your evaluations. You could send a sample syllabus, sample learning material. Again, if they ask for it. I wouldn't just send a bunch of stuff if they haven't asked for it. But you may be asked to share some evidence of your teaching. And again, Dr. Bell will talk about this a little bit more in depth in her workshop coming up. Okay, and for the diversity statement, which again, I'll touch on briefly, and Carrie and Wright will be leading a wonderful workshop on that in a couple of months. This is where institutions will ask you to reflect on really the dynamics of power and privilege in higher education. So it's where you want to show that you think about these issues, that you put them into practice in your work, that you are going to align with that institution's priorities for diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice. So you could talk about your experience working with minoritized populations, how they have informed your teaching, your scholarship, your service. If you have your own experience to bring to bear on that, you can share that as well. You want to discuss how you'll make contributions to diversity, equity, inclusion at their institution. Again, and I would look for places on their website where they speak to that directly, and make sure you understand what their commitments are so that you can kind of align your own vision and goals with that. And importantly, talk about concrete actions that you've taken, right? And I think this is a really important piece. You don't want to only be talking about the vision and in kind of broad terms, but also think about how you're really putting that into practice. How does that show up in your classroom? How does it show up in your research, right? How does it show up in the service that you do with your colleagues? So really think about that for yourself first, really reflect on that for yourself. And then also, not only so that your materials are aligned, but so that you're sure that your own goals, your own values and priorities are aligned with an institution where you're applying. Make sure you really want to be part of that institution, right? So look at how they are prioritizing diversity, equity, inclusion, what their commitments are, and then have that kind of in your mind as you're developing your diversity statement. And then letters of reference, you can ask faculty who you work with closely. Make sure they're faculty who know you well. Make sure they're people who can really speak to aspects of your research, maybe a mentor you've had who has supported your teaching, somebody on your dissertation committee, people who really have worked with you closely, who can speak to who you are as a scholar, who you are as a colleague, and not just kind of write a form letter for you. Make sure that you have a letter from your dissertation advisor or your PI, because that will raise a red flag for a hiring committee if they see that you don't have that included. So you want to make sure that you have that, and if you think that will be an issue to get, or you're feeling a little weird about that, that's a place where you want to talk to a mentor or some support to kind of strategize around that, because that is an important piece of the application. And again, use Interfolio to keep track of those letters of reference, because that will really help you in the process of asking for them. If they know that they only have to submit their letter to Interfolio one time, maybe twice if you do 2 rounds on the market, and then you'll just have it in your back pocket and you can send it out. You don't have to keep bothering them to resend it to every institution that requests it. So again, I love Interfolio. Make an investment in that account if you really are pursuing faculty job positions, because it's going to make your life so much easier. But do think about if you do end up doing 2 or more rounds on the market, just make sure those letters are updated every year, because you don't want to be going out with an outdated letter. Okay.
Molly, I'm sorry to
Yes.
interrupt. Just because I know you mentioned Interfolio several times, there's a question in the chat
Oh,
that
sorry, I didn't see
asked.
that.
No, that's okay. I'm keeping an eye on them
Yeah.
for you. The question really is what is Interfolio? Does it work like a LinkedIn or so if you could maybe just give a little bit more
Sure.
information on how it works. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So Interfolio, it's interfolio.com. It's an online, they call themselves an online dossier. It's basically an online, it's like Google Drive, basically, except it's linked to other institutions. So it's like a safe repository for your application materials where you can keep track of them. You can kind of store them on your end. And then when an institution requests them, so let's say I get asked to send 3 letters of reference to Stony Brook University, right? I can go into my Interfolio folder for my letters of reference, right? Where I've already sent an encoded link to faculty members and mentors who have asked to write a letter of reference. They upload their letter to Interfolio. And so I don't even see it. It's kept confidential, right? But I know that I have it there as a resource to share. And then I can just trigger that to be sent to the institution where I'm applying. So I can just send 3 letters of reference to Stony Brook, and those faculty members, once they've uploaded that letter for me, they don't have to do it again. They don't have to send it every single time I'm applying to a number of institution, right? Because on your search, you might be applying to 50, 100 different schools, right? You don't want to have to ask faculty members to send your letters 50 or 100 different times. But if they upload it through Interfolio, you can just trigger those to be sent whenever you need to. And it will go directly to the institution. They remain confidential. But it's just like a nice, clean way to do it. So I recommend just going to their website, interfolio.com, and checking it out and setting up an account. Because it will be a really helpful way to organize yourself. And as I mentioned, many institutions are also asking for applications to be sent through Interfolio. So you can just build you can upload your materials right into there and store them in the Interfolio interface and just trigger them to be sent to the institution directly. So you can kind of keep track of what you've sent out there that way.
Molly, just a quick follow-up question. Usually reference letters target mention a specific department the applicant is applying to. So does that mean those letters that are going into Interfolio are generic? So they're just their letter really written on your behalf, but open to any institution, correct?
Yeah, right. And that's why I recommend you want to update those every year if you're doing more than one round on the market. And that's a decision that you might want to make. Like I said, it really depends on the round where you're being asked for reference letters. So if you're being asked for reference letters in the first round, those generic letters are probably fine to send, and you want to have those. If you're being asked to send that reference in a later round, or usually at that point they might call references as well, then you might want to ask, hey, can you write, I'm really interested in this position. I'm, moving forward as a candidate, and I would really like you to share something that's specific to that institution. Would you mind writing me another letter that way? That's really up to you and kind of your relationship with that letter writer. But for most situations and for early rounds of the job market, which is what we're really talking about today, those kind of a letter, and I wouldn't even call it generic because it's not it's specific to you as the candidate, right? Your letter writer is writing about who you are, how they have seen you show up as a researcher, as a scholar, right? And they're thinking about your fit for a faculty position. So that's what they're writing to, and they're being specific about you, right? It may not necessarily name the institution that you're applying to, but that's okay because you're going to do that in your cover letter, and your other materials are going to be tailored to that. So I would say having those generic or those early letters that just speak to you as a candidate in your back pocket and Interfolio are really a good investment at this point. I hope that answers the question, but if there are follow-ups, let me know. All right, great. Okay, so thinking about our timeline, And I'm just keeping an eye on the time, so I might move through these next slides a little quickly, but we can have and answer any questions that come up. So as I said, this is a great time to be thinking about your search because it's a great time to start preparing your materials. Usually, again, it's discipline specific and it's changing a little bit because faculty hiring cycles are changing somewhat. But usually job postings show up in early fall for most fields. Which means that you probably would need to submit something by probably late October, early November. Sometimes I've seen December deadlines as well. Then you might hear back in December, probably before institutions go on holiday break. They might have a Zoom interview with you at that point if they want to move you forward as a candidate. And then usually spring is where you have like an on-campus second round interview where you'll go to campus, you'll meet faculty there, you'll meet the dean, probably the chair of the department. And then you might expect to, if you were selected as their candidate, you might expect an offer in March or April for a start in the following fall semester. So now is really the time, this late spring and summer is when you really want to start collecting those letters of reference, developing your material. So having a CV cover letter set of templates that you can then tailor to individual job positions and send out. Those teaching statements, diversity statements, research statements, all that stuff that you want to have in your back pocket and ready to go. So that when those job postings come up, you can really work quickly to apply to all the places that you're interested in. And if you are usually within your academic discipline, once you get to this point, you might already know kind of the places to look for jobs. Like, again, my background is in the humanities. So for me, it's MLA jobs, like that's where everybody goes. But other places to look for, STEM careers, other higher ed careers, science careers, nature jobs. The Chronicle often has faculty job postings. Higher ed jobs usually, will have jobs across a wide range of disciplines. There are a bunch here, and I'll share these slides with links, but also do kind of get in touch with what is the norm in your academic discipline, and you can ask your advisor, your PI, what they recommend, because you want to make sure that you are looking where the job ads are popping up for you. Okay, so here's the kind of strategy piece and the kind of getting organized as you embark on this process, because having an organized and strategic approach to sending out applications will really serve you well, not only in increasing your odds at being successful on the market, but also saving your sanity as well. So number one, you want to submit enough applications that you increase your odds, right? It's a competitive market and we all know that. So the probability that the more applications you have out there, the more likely you are to get a bite, right? And there's research to support that, but there's a risk of kind of sending out so much that you burn yourself out, because that is real. B, kind of cut corners and that doing that research on each institution and tailoring your materials so that it feels like on the other end, like you are just sending out materials everywhere, right? And that's less likely to get you a bite because that comes across clearly when materials are kind of generic like that. And also you want to make sure not only that you are tailoring your materials so that you show up as a good candidate, but you also want to make sure that you're not wasting your time and energy applying to institutions and for jobs that you don't actually want to take. So even though you want to send out a lot of applications, even though you want to really maximize your odds that way, do take the time, do create enough time in your schedule, enough space for yourself to really evaluate, number one, is this a job that I really wanted? If they offer me this job tomorrow, do I really want to take it, right? Do I really want to move across the country and live in, wherever it is? Or does this institution really fit who I am, right? Like really think about that at the beginning. And then also take the time to make sure that if the answer to that is yes, that you do want that job, that you're really tailoring your materials to show them why you are the best candidate for that role. And then also this is, and this was kind of a, something I figured out I needed to do very quickly. Keep a very detailed spreadsheet, like have a Google Sheet where you keep track of everything that you send out, because you're going to be sending out so much stuff that you're going to forget from one week to the next what you applied for. So make sure when you see a job ad that you really like, enter it in your spreadsheet, have a link to the ad, right? You might also want to like print it to PDF and save it into a folder as well if you like to have that as a reference. Track the due date, track what materials you need, track, any keywords that you feel are important that you make that ad stand out to you. Geographic location might be another thing that you want to track if you're doing a national or international search. And anything else that you feel is important to note about that job ad, enter that on a spreadsheet line. And then when you submit it, have like a checkbox and a date that you submitted stuff so that you know what you sent out. Interfolio keeps track of these things too if you send materials out through Interfolio, but not all job ads will be through Interfolio. So you want to make sure that you have a master list, because if you are called back for an interview, and we hope that you are, you want to make sure that you have that job ad to refer back to, that you can go through all of the things that you sent out to really look at, okay, this is what I sent them. This is how I talked about myself in this context. This is what I know about this position. It will just make life so much easier for yourself. And then also, in addition to that spreadsheet, keep track in a Google Drive folder or Dropbox folder, whatever you like, of those versions of the cover letters and CVs and all that other stuff that you sent to each institution, just so that, again, you can refer back to those things if you need to later on. It'll help you so much. Okay. And we're not good. I mean, interviews are really the second part of the process. I talked a little bit about what that process looked like, but generally if you're called back for an interview, the first round will be first virtual on Zoom in most cases. Just like sending out your materials, you want to do your homework. Do your homework on the people that you'll be meeting with if you know that information. And just prepare to answer some basic questions on who you are, your research, your publications, your future directions. Give that, be ready with that, again, 3-minute talk about who you are as a scholar and where you're headed. And then the second round, if you move forward in the search process, would be likely a campus visit, where you meet the people on the search committee, you meet other faculty, the chair, the dean. You might be asked to give a talk on your research. You might be asked to give a teaching demo. But those are future concerns, right? Right now, just focus on building a really strong application package. And then once we're ready, once you start hearing back about interviews, then you can start strategizing that next step. Okay. And in the interest of time, I'm gonna just skip kind of over the job talk piece, because we'll have later workshops on your job talk, your negotiation, all of that stuff, and negotiating the offer. Just a note to think about, and this is something to think about at the front end of the process, right? Think about what you can negotiate if you do get an offer, and also do some salary homework now, right? Understand what the salary levels are at different institutions. Some states are required to disclose salary on job ads, but not all of them are. So there's a link here that I'll share with the slides, where you can do some research on faculty compensation around the country at different institutions. And that's another step as you're thinking about tailoring your materials. Are the look at the cost of living of where the institution is, and look at what the typical salaries are for faculty in that institution. And is that something that you can do, right? And maybe look at that before you even start kind of building your materials out, because you don't want to spend time and energy on something that's not the right fit for you. Okay, and more about negotiation. We're going to share these slides so you'll have these resources. But we'll have later workshops specifically on the interview process, on negotiation, and all of that. But I do want to just touch on future workshops in this series. As I mentioned, where we'll go more in depth into these various components of the application. So we'll have a workshop coming up on CVs and cover letters, on teaching statements, diversity statements, and research statements. And we'll have a link so that you can register for those and really put a lot of effort into building strong materials for your application package. And then I also wanted to mention, because we've been talking about Plan B and parallel searches, if you are thinking about a parallel search where you're doing a faculty job search, but you also want to think about maybe industry options at the same time, the Career Center is offering a workshop tomorrow, virtually, tomorrow evening virtually. That's about taking your CV and turning it into a resume for an industry search. So if that's something you're thinking about and doing these searches in tandem, you might want to register for that as well, so that you have both sets of materials ready to go and, increase your options and make decisions accordingly. Okay, so I will end it there, and I'm happy if there are any questions. I'm happy to chat some more.
Molly, I do want to say thank you for facilitating this fantastic workshop on the process and that 101, keeping it simple and easy and really touching upon the main points. I love the idea of the spreadsheet. I tell our undergraduate students who are applying for research opportunities, keep a spreadsheet. So it's just taking that and moving it forward as you continue to move throughout your career. So I really love that. As you shared, we do have several other seminars that are coming up. We will share them. Once we share the slides, we will reshare those other dates and times as well. And the link is the same. It's one link to register for the entire series. So I did ask if there's any questions in the chat. Nothing new is coming up, but if somebody wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, please do so. No questions? Oh, let's see. If there are no questions, we will give everybody some time. Hopefully you have a chance to go outside and take a walk today in the beautiful weather and enjoy it while it lasts. But you will hear from us shortly. We will share the presentation slides, the recording, as well as I mentioned, our future seminars. So thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you and your patience. So we apologize for our hiccups in the beginning with our Zoom, but I appreciate you all sticking around and being patient and participating. So thank you.
Yes, thank you all for coming, and thank you to the CIE for putting on this amazing series, because as I've said a few times, it's so important to have support through this process. So this is such a great resource.
Thank you. All right, well, have a great day, everybody. All right, a minute. Let's see. Oh, let me stop that. And